It's not all about the money. A capabilities approach to defining poverty by Harry McBride and Heeth Varnedoe. Before we begin, we would like to discuss why it is important for us to define and measure poverty in the first place. Almost everyone can agree that poverty exists, so what is the point confining it to a concrete definition? Doesn't a definition and a measurement oversimplify a complex social, political, and cultural issue? Our answer? Perhaps it does, but we must try to obtain a definition that encapsulates all of poverty's complexity for the sake of the people that poverty affects. We believe that poverty adversely affects people, that is detrimental to their quality of life, and we believe that people matter. Therefore, it is vital that we give poverty a definition and find a way to measure it. Because without a definition and a means of measuring poverty, we have no starting point when it comes to alleviating it and its effects. We cannot combat what we cannot name or identify. We believe that the progression of poverty analysis starts with a definition, which leads to a measurement, which allows us to determine an appropriate response. So what is our definition of poverty? We believe that poverty is best defined as a form of capability failure due to a lack of economic resources. In light of this definition, we think the best way to measure poverty is to evaluate a household's economic resources and to use that evaluation to determine if those resources allow a household to possess a minimally acceptable level of capabilities. But we'll come back to this later. Before we explain our definition of how poverty should be defined in the U.S., let's discuss how the government currently does so. Currently in the United States, poverty is measured using the Official Poverty Measurement, or OPM. The OPM was developed in the mid-1960s by Molly Orshansky and consists of a set of thresholds for families of different compositions that are compared to their gross annual pre-tax income to determine their poverty status. The threshold represents the minimum cost of food at the time the measure was created, multiplied by 3. The cost of food is multiplied by 3 because when the threshold was created, the average household spent about a third of their income on food. If a household's income falls below the threshold, the U.S. Census Bureau defines that household as poor. Sounds simple enough. It looks like the U.S. Census Bureau has already answered our question for us, right? Not so fast. When we take a closer look at the OPM, we immediately see some real problems with its definition of poverty. First, the threshold that the OPM uses to determine if a household's income is adequate when it comes to meeting their basic needs is outdated. While the Food Times 3 algorithm may have depicted what a family needed to meet their basic needs in 1963 when about a third of income was spent on food, we know that now the average household only spends between a sixth and a tenth of their income on food. John Iceland also points out that the gross annual pre-tax income used to determine if a family is above or below the poverty threshold does not include in-kind or near-money government benefits, which could be used to help a household meet its basic needs. Not counting these benefits gives us a lack of insight into the amount of income a family actually has at its disposal. Kathleen Short also adds that things like payroll taxes, which would have a negative effect on disposable income, are also not considered under the OPM. In addition, Short notes that the OPM does not account for variations in expenses that come with having a job and earning an income, such as transportation and childcare costs. Finally, she explains that the OPM has no way of accounting for variations in medical expenses or variations in expenses due to geographic location, such as a higher cost of living. So what is the point of all this? What are we getting at by pointing out the weaknesses of the OPM? The point is that income alone does not show us a complete picture. Solely evaluating a household based off its gross annual pre-tax income does not show us the reality of people's well-being, or lack thereof. To illustrate this point, Amartya Sen uses the example of two people who earn the same income, but one has a parasitic disease that causes him to waste nutrients. The person with the parasitic disease is less able to maintain a nutritious diet on the same income as a healthy person. Isn't it clear now that income is not the alpha and omega of poverty analysis? That there's a little more to the story than the gross amount of cash a household brings in? Income is important in poverty analysis, but what matters most is what that income allows you to do, what it makes you capable of achieving. This brings us back to our definition of poverty as a form of capability failure due to a lack of economic resources. Amartya Sen explains capability in this way. Functionings represent the various things that a person manages to do or be in leading a life. The capability of a person reflects the alternative combinations of functionings the person can achieve and from which he or she can choose one collection. To put it in layman's terms, capability is what you are able to do and achieve based on the resources that are at your disposal. Functionings are what you actually do or achieve in light of what you are capable of. When it comes to poverty analysis, we believe capabilities are what matter the most. We are less concerned with functionings. Our lack of concern with functionings can be illustrated by Amartya Sen's distinction between someone who is starving because they do not have the economic means to purchase food versus someone who is fasting for religious reasons. The person who is fasting still possesses the capability to have a nutritious diet. She simply chooses not to, and we certainly wouldn't call her poor. On the other hand, the person who is starving lacks the capability to lead a healthy life due to a lack of economic resources, and we would call her poor. Therefore, for the sake of poverty analysis, we assert that a capability-centered approach is the most useful. So what capabilities do we believe are necessary for people to possess so that they can achieve a sufficient level of well-being and quality of life? Martha Nussbaum identifies a list of 10 central capabilities that she asserts are necessary for humans to possess in order to pursue a dignified life. Among these central capabilities are such things as being able to live a normal-length human life, being able to have good health, and being able to engage in social interaction. While Nussbaum's list may be lacking some capabilities that one could argue are necessary to a life well lived, we believe it is a good starting point when it comes to identifying capabilities that an individual could be deprived of due to a lack of economic resources. We believe that if economic deprivation leads to an individual's inability to possess a mentally acceptable level of these central capabilities, then that individual should be classified as poor. An evaluation of economic resources is essential in determining the level of capability a household possesses. The progression starts with evaluating a household's economic resources, then comparing its resources to its basic needs and expenses, and then using that comparison to infer whether that household possesses basic capabilities. Income is a crucial factor in making this determination, but as Sen explains, to have inadequate income is not a matter of having an income below an externally fixed poverty line, but to have an income below what is adequate for generating the specified levels of capabilities for the person in question.
Now that we have a definition of poverty as capability failure due to a lack of economic resources, we can determine an appropriate threshold of economic resources to provide a minimum level of central capabilities. To be clear, this minimum level of central capabilities does not require someone to obtain each capability to its fullest capacity. In fact, he doesn't even need to have each capability. As previously stated, poverty is by no means a one-size-fits-all measurement, and that is true for measuring central capabilities as well. Realizing the apparent weaknesses of the OPM, Congress tasked the National Academy of Sciences with researching and suggesting alternative measurements of poverty. What the Academy recommended is a much more comprehensive, updated measure. We believe the best way to measure poverty is one that allows us to infer a household's capability. The SPM is a much more comprehensive measure of a household's economic resources, and thus can be better used to determine whether a household possesses a minimum level of central capabilities. Contrary to the OPM, the SPM can give a much more accurate description of a household's central capabilities. Rather than multiplying a minimum food diet by 3 to determine poverty thresholds, as the OPM does, the SPM threshold represents dollar amounts spent on basic goods multiplied by 1.2. These basic goods are food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, commonly referred to as FCSU. The 1.2 adds in other needs such as personal care and non-work transportation. Compiling data from the consumer expenditure surveys over the previous 5 years, a threshold for a family with 2 children is established at the 33rd percentile of the expenditure distribution. Besides a more modern approach to creating poverty thresholds, the SPM also includes an updated family measurement and adjustments of the thresholds. The SPM accounts for unconventional households, such as cohabitation among unmarried couples and foster children. So households like this one, with a single female, a child under 18, a roommate, and another non-relative, can be accurately depicted. Additionally, thresholds are adjusted for family size and composition, and geographic differences in housing costs, like the variation between living in New York City and living in rural South Carolina. The SPM does a much better job determining a household's true economic resources by using a more inclusive calculation. Rather than simply computing resources as the gross annual pre-tax income, the SPM adds all of the following: cash income from all sources, and the value of in-kind benefits used to buy your FCSUs. Some of these benefits are SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, WIC, or Women, Infants, and Children, a nutritional service, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, Medicaid, and subsidized housing. The SPM also subtracts these additional discretionary expenses which cannot be classified under FCSU. Income and Social Security taxes, though some may receive tax credits or EITC from the IRS due to low income. Child care, work transportation, child support payments, and healthcare or medical out-of-pocket costs. With a much better sense of a household's economic resources, we can better deduce the central capabilities of a household. Results from the SPM often show a different and somewhat larger population in poverty. For example, larger proportions of the elderly, married couple families, and working families are in poverty using the SPM. These larger proportions are not surprising due to the differences in measurement. The SPM does not adjust for age when calculating thresholds, and elderly people generally need less resources to live above the poverty line. Child care and work-related expenses are calculated into a family's economic resources. In conclusion, although the definition of poverty is a highly contentious issue debated in all realms of society, we must do our best to define it, because we care about those who are affected by poverty. We believe poverty is best defined by capability failure due to a lack of economic resources. This definition of poverty allows us to gain an insight that is far closer to the reality of people's lives, a clearer picture, if you will, than simple absolute measures such as the OPM. With that being said, we believe a measure such as the SPM, which is a more comprehensive evaluation of a household's economic resources, allows us to better determine the level of capability it possesses.